good. The standard is maximizing expected well-being. The resolution's actors, the United States government, use utilitarianism. Good in 90. Public officials are obliged to make choices under uncertainty. Public officials are poorly informed of the effects and choices will have on an individual. They typically do not know the averages and averages. Policymakers use utility. They want to know how to choose general rules of conduct. And utilitarianism is a prerequisite to any other framework. Sacrifice in the name of preserving rights destroys any hope for future generations of attaining any value. 986. For civilization, to sacrifice itself makes no sense. There's no survivors to give them meaning. The act is possible to imagine any threat to the world, justifying the raising the threat of the billions of lives of 1 to tens and thousands. When we pursue the several values, it's simultaneously the often conflicting difficult trade-offs. They made one value absolute. Why would we likely to get the value else? Survival is necessary for the enjoyment of values and advantage. One is infrastructure. Modern market forces always avoid helping the other, creating immense suffering and dehumanization. McLaurin 4. Neoliberalism naturalizes suffering, undermining collective struggles. Humanity is led by collective suicide. Grotesque conditions are present. Inequalities of wealth paved for the obscene concentrations of wealth created the world increasingly divided between those in dehumanizing conditions. We are witnessing the disintegration of abject poverty, and the failure of the system means we need to take action. Self-orientation comes first. Johnston 04. Under capitalism, liberation thinking first, crucial stuff must be taking action, must be intervened. One must resist temptation, the short-circuit thinking in the favor of acting, since the rushes to the actions are doomed. They either fail to disrupt capitalism or are co-opted by it, and due to the cost, infrastructure in otherized areas won't be built under the current model. National service is key to solving. Panetta 17. National service can help address our country's backlog of physical infrastructure investment, which otherwise would be far more expensive to repair highways and other faculty service programs. Have the potential to offset some of the looming costs by providing low-cost labor, while also teaching valuable job skills. An increase in infrastructure is key to education, decreasing poverty, and closing the class gap. E&G 12. The U.S. has 25 years of academic research on the impact of infrastructure on growth. Infrastructure matters to growth. Infrastructure directly raises productivity by providing access to roads, or improve education by cutting costs, improve jobs and income levels. And empirics prove giving these people a road to success also gives them a voice. Their voice, combined with the spirit of compulsory national service, causes a long-term change. Barber 84. Only through civic revitalization can we hope for the greater economic democracy. Greater government-sponsored projects have been underexplored despite the stunning success of compulsory national service. Government-run economic activity is likely to succeed under altering economic attitudes. And advantage, too, is the environment. Current environmental concern is down. Sina 17. There are deep partisan divides on the issue. Republicanism stopped decreased since 2004. Roughly 6 in 10 Republicans said environmental laws and regulations cost too many jobs, and the economy is up from 34% in 07. This partisan gap now stands at 41 percentage points in 2007. It was only 10. And people are psychologically not motivated to aid the environment. Compulsory involvement is necessary to cause a change. Pfeiffer and Branch 13. There is considerable scientific consensus regarding global warming, and most of us look the other way. We have too many other things to worry about. The human brain can only handle conceptions and concerns. Brains are naturally wired to scan for danger with preferences to focus on problems fixed right away. The human race is more likely to solve the problems that require a hammer if the hammer is at hand for global environmental problems. We don't have that hammer. We're disconnected Americans inside 90% of the time living in alternative reality. Affects us in profound ways. We have become separated from the earth, and compulsory national service uniquely reconnects humans with the nature and allows for long-term solvency. Panetta 2. Service programs train youth for conservation, reconnect Americans to the outdoors, build an ethic of environmental stewardship by fostering the physically reconnect with nature. Working engulfs the minds and the participation in nature, and rebuilds the bridge between humanity and the earth that has been burned by modern society. National service increase in energy and water efficiency, renewable energy, and positive behavioral change. And first impacts is equality. National service with an environmental focus deconstructs the border mentality by showing all people are part of a larger ecosystem. Tricard 97. The environment is the central factor in framing the community. The belief in undifferentiated landscape does a disservice to understand how the communities work and what it takes to rebuild them. By starting with the environment, national service programs can understand how communities are situated in the nexus of overlapping natural, social, and economic systems. National service movements join forces to recast our natural resource policies that respect science and society and values of the environment. And border mentality creates an us versus them dichotomy, which leads to a never-ending cycle of structural and physical violence. Jones 11. Abstract notions of us and them are materialized in forms of the lines on the map. The border becomes the last defense to protect against the privilege and perceived homogeny of the state. The trend towards the repeating cycle of never-ending structure and physical violence. And borders stigmatize people as the enemy other. This is used by the state to maintain control. Aganthalou 04. Elites exploit violence to affix collective identities and subsume dissenting opportunities for transformational exchange. In exchange for more violence, states target the other as the cause of the violence and destruction of the world, presents the national self as innocent and the enemy other as the demonic. And next is the extinction impact. Absent the mindset shift caused by the national service, environmental degradation will continue. Heading 09. Consider the environmental crisis and will not threaten not only human civilization but all forms of life on this planet. We will have no hope of successfully addressing the root cause of the crisis until we confront epistemology. What is needed is a new way of thinking and acting rather than a way of understanding ourselves and our relationship to the world. And without decreasing degradation, extinction will occur. Bukinski 10. The rapid loss of animals and plant species are characterized in the past century must end if humans are able to survive. Business as usual is no more an option. Ecosystems are approaching a tipping point which if reached, we may recover from. And next impact is the war, instability, and economics. UN 4. Threatening water supplies and the fertility of the land and the cleanliness of the air, recipes for instability between communities and neighboring countries. Environmental degradation could undermine local and international security by declining environment, can depress economic activity and diminish the authority of the state in the eyes of the citizens. The addressing environmental problems can foster trust among communities and neighboring countries. And then third advantage is disaster porn, or the lust for and dehumanization created by the screen of modern warfare normalizes our lust for death. Park 16. The capacity of the drone to detect the phenomenon to render the live video feed the potential materiality or alter the effect of the phenomenon on the screen involves the capacity to register the dynamism occurrence within the drone has become the most popular forms of warfare in the past years, and the screen shields us from our sin. And these images are create false illusions, strip agency, and ensure long-term dependency on the state, increasing biopower. Omar and Dawal 93. Reducing nameless lectures in the shadows behind the hurting and humiliated humans are being not asked if they want to be portrayed in a degrading way. All these are just facets of life. They are not what is shown, but we are starvation is the exception. And national service is key to solving this. Gobri 13. During Vietnam, the anti-war movement not only stemmed from the conscripts were shipped in large numbers to the United States and the Iraq for much longer, given the vast majority of the U.S. families will never bear the price. Military service gives a dovish bias to the country's foreign policy. The entire country bears the cost. Everyone has a child in the military. This provides a border to the lust for death, which is why I urge you to affirm.
Where did you stop?
I did not read the Baudrillard cover.
There's not. Oh, okay.
And the
it's like
fair and parts 1. Yep.
Oh, okay. You just delete those out. Okay. I'm just going with time. Okay. So, does the act assert that we should have compulsory national service?
Yes.
Okay. So, like, forces them to engage in like national service.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Next, you'll also talk. So, on the framework, can you explain like this NI card here?
Right. So what the NI card is saying is that we need to actually make sure the maintenance of the human species and like our bodies as a whole, lives are the most important, because if you value anything else, for those values to actually occur and reproduce in society, people need to be alive to experience them and try to pursue them.
Okay. And then also, is it possible? Do you have any sort of like pre-fiat, like ways you can trigger any sort of pre-fiat framing on the AC?
I guess not. I don't really know what you like. A lot of people have different interpretations of what pre-fiat means, but I guess not.
Like, I guess like policy making arguments. Okay, never mind. Is there like any possibility of like a contingent standard coming off of like the NI card or anything else?
What do you mean by contingent standard?
Like, if I beat back one of your standard justifications to like collapse into like a different framework.
No.
Okay. Are there any impacts to like sort of like are there any impacts to like capitalism?
The advantage 1 is talking a lot about capitalism.
Okay.
It's saying, I don't know if you need me to explain it.
No, I got it.
Okay.
And then also, is this like, so, how does like the borders, like the borders advantage like, or the equality impact like necessarily matter underneath your framing?
Right, so what it's saying is that, if you're talking like why does equality matter under util, equality matters under util because this is like a nuanced version of util. It's not just saying, if you read the card, it's not just saying like it's a body count. We need to actually take into account like what those bodies are and how they are affected. So equality clearly flows under the framework, and also it's like the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. Obviously having that form of inequality is very bad.
Okay, so this like cares about oppression to like a certain extent.
Yeah.
Insofar as like, I guess, reduced marginal utility sort of arguments.
I don't know what you mean by reduced marginal utility, but the criterion of maximizing expecting well-being is like specifically like made to be a nuanced approach to util, where it's not just like the physical counting of all the bodies.
Are any of these advantages like not consequentialist? Or do you think that you need to win consequentialism in order to win any of these advantages?
I don't think I necessarily have to win consequentialism. I don't know what framework you're going for, but there's obviously ways that I can like leverage these under different frameworks. I don't know if you
Yeah, but like which
list them
ones?
all. I mean, like, all of them can be leveraged under different frameworks. It just depends on what framework you're gonna read. Like, that's kind of something that happens at the time. You know, I don't like.
Okay, that's fine. Alright, subprep. Okay. I'll send it to you.
What time do you work?
2:16. Oh, I have to. Alright, sending right now. It's sent.
So what's the order?
Order's gonna be NC, AC.
Do you want to borrow my stamp?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for offering.
Yeah, no problem.
Alright,
I just got it.
alright. Oh, crap. I had 2:16 left. Sorry, my timer just didn't put it down. Is anyone not ready?
What's the order?
NCAC.
Okay.
I value morality, ethics is binding as a condition of ethics that must be binding as its purpose is to guide action. If it isn't binding, then it can't have authority over us, so we can opt out. And a constitution is also our ability to reason. For our one, the norms of morality have special authority. They are categorically binding regardless of the contingent motives, preference, and intention. The norm of particular games, institutions, and practice are only conditionally binding. They have normative force only for agents who have a good enough reason to participate in the unconditional laws are found in the nature of agency. A systematic ability would be guided by the requirements amounts to a loss of agency. There is a sense that we cannot be but agents and preempt. One, if they say the binding is important, that means that we can just opt out of a framework or have no reason to accept the strength of their argument for why it's bad. Two, binding is bad. It presumes the framework to assert its badness in the first place, which must be binding as I can opt out of their framework otherwise. And ethics must be binding in our form, which is what we are, is the most binding of us. Boyle and Love and 10. Goodness for a thing follows inevitably from its binding of belonging to a kind. Why the thing at issue ought to pursue as we ask. Well, from what standpoint is this a question posed to the thing in question? Generally is a bearer of such and such a form, then as a pursuer of such and such ends. It can no more renounce the sense than it can cease to be itself. And the form of the species is that they're all productive and satisfy the needs, but humans form have species being or agency as they're conscious over their labor, making it creative. Wardenberg 82. Species being a free conscious activity. Animals build nests and dwellings, but animals are constrained with naturally given needs. Human beings are able to produce in accordance with their own plans, even in the absence of any physical need. The human being truly produces from in freedom from such need, and thus, in Marx sees human freedom as dependent upon our ability to produce objects according to our conscious plans. And if we prevent others from being able to achieve their own goals, they will logically have the ability to prevent our own goals from being achieved. So we should respect each other's ends. Year 99. Insofar as I represent rationally determined, and I represent as having rational objectives with I must represent my constraints that I have adopted, constraints that structure the possible space of choice and action. Since the end function as objective must demand that this constraint be recognized as just cannot be indifferent to the attitudes and actions of others, for this may either help or hinder the pursuit of my end. All this subject recognize and represent my ends as constraining their actions just like I represent as constraining my actions. This hijacks end-based framing as we respect each other's ends to ensure that they won't prevent our own ends from being achieved. And just exempting these arguments, but agency is our ability to productively labor is the largest enterprise in the fact that if we no matter what we are in society, whether that's a fireman, a teacher, or a policymaker, we're always going to have the agency, the ability to be able to productively labor and be able to choose what kind of labor that we're actually going to do. And on top of that, to try and escape our creative labor is an instance of creative labor in and of itself, because you're using creative labor in order you're trying to creatively labor toward the end of getting out of the ability of creative labor. And also the standards consisting of, so thus the standards consisting of species being. And onto the impact calculus, evaluate impacts of alienation based on the intent to promote alienation, not the consequence of the framework. This means based foreseen impacts are independent of what an agent determines, because the consequences themselves are dependent upon things external to it. Also, only how we will the means of action can be self-determined. Additionally, the NC doesn't have a maximum striving force, so even if you turn case, you still violate the standard. Good intentions though, make it so that you can still will over a bad intention. And the universal and particular or non-ideal theories, it must be used together. The particular can inform the universal, but we must have a universal starting point to motivate agents with a common binding feature, the correct moral behavior. Actually, no, just skip that card. And part 2 is forced labor causes alienation, and species being applies to right to labor or conscious activity. They force us to become mere animals due to forcing us to labor in certain ways, violating our ability to consciously labor. Warren 2. Marx holds that we are able to achieve freedom through freely chosen products. Capitalism is a system that alienated labor, forces the capitalists to labor for an entire day. Human species being is not allowed to realize human freedom, but functions merely to keep a worker alive. A worker uses all of his or her human capabilities for labor simply in order to stay alive and reproduce him or herself. The right to labor implies a choice to labor, because labor is what humans do when they consciously produce. They violate the framework because they don't allow for choice in labor due to the word compulsory in the resolution. This happens in all instances of the affirmative. This becomes part of their intentions. We only discount consequences based on their uncontrollability due to their unpredictable nature. Now onto the hijacks. Now onto their framing. First, if you are justified in alienating other people, then they are justified in alienating you, which means that you can't achieve the app's creative end. Means that we hijack the app. Second, to evaluate actions that would maximize utility rather than just utility for just ourselves, we must have creativity to pursue that end, as it doesn't bring us closer to naturally given needs to consider others. Otherwise, we can just opt out of it. Also means we hijack the app. On top of that. One is not now onto the framework just in general. One is not binding. We can always abstract from pain and pleasure. If there's a death in the family chooses to know about it, even if it would cause them pain to know about it. Two, their conception of the agent is limited. We aren't just hedonistic desires. Otherwise, we just have no reason to act on others' behalf. There's things other than pleasure that we value. The truth may hurt, but we still value knowledge. And third, an infinite number of impacts results from any given event because the causal chains following any initial action are interminable. Utilitarianism is not a sustainable ethical theory because it requires the impossible epistemological burden of isolating and evaluating infinite number of impacts in order to render ethical judgment, i.e. the worst of human tragedies may result in an infinitely greater good at a given point in time. And onto good. Turn. Aggregation is a means to an end. This is a violation because you're using those aggregators as a means to an end. This creates a contradiction because you use the ability to aggregate people into the greater good, quote unquote. It allows them to be able to justify the same thing onto you, which prevents you from being able to achieve your end. Second, turn. Consequences are also indeterminable. Utils larger and unpredictable because the infinite number of factors that could affect future outcomes. It's impossible for policymakers to make decisive decision on utilitarianism. They never give us a threshold for how certain policymakers need to be. 3, there's no link. Policymakers, no examples. Policymakers know several empirical situations that allow them to use deontology. And that means this means that you prefer deontology for the same reason as stated before. 4, turn skip those two arguments. But also, policymakers are also constrained by other things that don't make them strictly utilitarian, such as the Constitution or what the people say. And this means that, and as long as this is true, then that means that governments don't always act under utilitarian calculus. It means that they can act under things other than util. And on their active specificity arguments, you should also look for the fact that can account for states because of just the fact that states are made up of individuals, and also the enterprise argument. Individuals have to individuals are obligated to constitute obligations just as well. Now onto their arguments on 9. First, this assumes consequentialism because with any death impacts because their case has to be able to show there's any death impacts in the first place. And second, we aren't like second. You can also cross apply this argument in a second different way, in which you can say that just because we are in control of our consequences all the time because there's something that are external to the will. The intent is really the only thing that we can actually control to the will. And second, this also only justifies your life having any value, and it doesn't justify other people's lives having any value. So this all clearly fails the ethical framework. And third, morality exists independent of any whether we are alive. So this argument doesn't matter. And fourth, this is not binding an argument, as a soldier can jump in front of another soldier who's being shot at to show that because he thinks it's the right thing to do. And this means that life isn't necessarily something that we always value in every sense, because there's moral obligations that we need to consider are something that should come first. Next, now onto the contention level. You need to group. These arguments are all consequentialist, and they rely on a consequentialist notion and the fact that morality is conceived in the ends of the action, in the consequences of action. But rather, we say that intents come first because they're the only thing that we can actually control, and also prefer active mission distinction because of the fact that there's no active mission distinction. I mean, there is active mission distinction because otherwise we will just be infinite calculating what would be something better. Otherwise, we're culpable for the deaths of people that we don't even know about, and because we're always going to have to be calculating, and this prevents us from being able to achieve any sort of policy action in the first place.
Everyone good?
Yeah.
Okay. So on the framework, you're basically saying that we should never overstep into someone else's rights, correct? Because that means that they could then step into our rights, right?
To an extent, there's more nuance than that.
So if it's what's the nuance? What's the extent?
So there's also things like hindrance of a hindrance, or different things that we might say are constraints on this, whether it's an imperfect or perfect
So
duty.
if there's constraints on it, how does it follow your meta ethic of bindingness?
Because that still all stems from the fact that we are agents that set and pursue goals.
Okay, but you just said that in this theory there are exceptions. There are issues where the nuances of it, like you said. How is that binding?
I'm not sure I necessarily understand how why this means that it wouldn't be binding.
Okay, so then what is bindingness?
Bindingness is is what prevents us from being able to opt out of a moral theory. It doesn't necessarily force us to do it, but it just says that ethics needs to be able to say that you are bad for doing a wrong action. And if we can just opt out of a moral theory, then morality has no claim on whether an action is bad or not.
Okay, so if you can opt out of a moral theory, aren't these nuances and exemptions opting out of your moral theory?
Why?
I'm asking you.
No.
Okay. So why isn't util inherently binding?
Okay, so I give 2 reasons. One is the fact that we can abstract away from our desires to choose other things, and that means that we don't always value pleasure in every sense, or well-being, I guess.
Okay. So what is the world of the alternative look
and
like?
the second one is the soldier talking about the other one.
Got it. What's the world of the alternative look like when you are never able to actually violate someone else's rights? How can the government take any form of action?
I guess we would say that's dependent on it's dependent on different individual debates in things like hindrance of a hindrance and how that would apply.
Can you explain hindrance of a hindrance?
So if the unilateral will is something that is true, then hindrance of a hindrance is justified in the fact that we should be able to hinder other people who are hindering others. If a kidnapper kidnaps someone, we should be able to say that we can stop the kidnapper from doing that.
Okay. So, and you're saying, how does that apply to your framework?
I guess it doesn't really have that much of an impact in this specific scenario that I'm talking about.
Okay. Yeah, basically I'm done. I'll take breath. Stopping with 221.
Are you gonna read anything?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me know when you get it.
Sorry about that.
I can know. It's gonna be, one off ACNC. This is, you got it? Okay. One off ACNC. Everyone good?
Yeah.
The affirmative commodification of animals is an anthropocentric and drug environmental disruption, Suzuki and Mulo 9. We believe that we are those realists at the center of the world, everything around us is an opportunity or resource to exploit. This is the anthropocentric view of life. Our survival depends on our health and our being in the natural world, and anthropocentrism creates hierarchies and that makes destruction inevitable. Smith. The other life forms don't express themselves in the way that humans are because by language and terms easily comprehensible by the common human standard and often considered less developed and inferior, more primitive the mechanism, and usually less importance of humans, and all beings are needed to regard the worthy of respect, and the apps key to solve only passing compulsory national survey can we bridge the non-human human divide, refuse to engage with the mindset of the negative and reject their methodology. His framework is reliant on the fact that humans are a superior species, that we have some sort of will between each other that other animals don't have. The wording of his carding is degrading towards animals. Says specifically, we don't want to be reduced to mere animals. Direct quote from his card. Anthropocentrism reentrenches all the impacts of the NC and the AC for that matter, and on framing. Alienation theory is wrong. Its perfectionist view of humanity and its purpose ignores the aspects of life common with other species. Woodsmith 16. Marx's alienation stems from the notion of species being in a perfectionist view. It ascribes to a certain way of life best for all species, and the problem is that it assumes just because an aspect of the human must be raised and family life is not unique to humans. Production is not mean by intrinsically fulfilling. There is no compelling argument to the state that human intrinsically should have fulfilling and pleasant work. This means that the impact of his framing doesn't actually exist because the whole impact is based on alienation theory. But this alienation theory doesn't actually live up to its standards on the AC. You're gonna extend good in 90. He doesn't answer the impact that because the U.S. is a form of government, they need to weigh the consequences between its actions. This means that because the resolution and the actor of the resolution is a government, you have to prefer utilitarianism. And extend 986. People need to first be alive before we can treat them as a means or have any other value. He misunderstands his card. If you actually believe his framing at all, that we need to respect people, those people need to be alive first for us to respect them. It's a prerequisite to any other value or framing in the debate. And 986 means that you need to look through util because that's the only way to avoid extinction impacts. And he says that my util isn't binding. The problem is that the weighing mechanism is binding. He says people can decide what's pleasurable and what is pain. The problem is that the mechanism of that deciding between the pleasure and the pain is the binding aspect. But also it doesn't matter because I'm still able to link under his framing, or his framing doesn't have any impact because of the card I read above. Also, extend the criterion of maximizing well-being. This means that we have to look through the overall society and what can be best for everyone. And on 986, he says it assumes consequentialism and need the will. The problem is that no, 986 is a really broad philosophical card saying that we need to be alive and exist before any other form of value can occur. This means that you're gonna have to look to my extinction impact first, which goes cold conceded. Go to the extinction impact. The extinction impact first. Heading 09 extended. Absent the mindset shift caused by national service, environmental degradation will continue indefinitely because we need to rethink our connection with the environment. Extend Panetta 2, which is saying that national service is key to a long-term mindset shift with our regards to environmental service because we need to force people to physically be in the environment because we don't view the environment as an equal, which is really relevant by the K I read against his case. And you're going to extend the terminal impact, which is Basinski 10, saying that without decreasing the degradation, extinction will occur. This is really key because biodiversity is key to actually maintaining all of our life on Earth. He's going to try to stand up in his next speech and make new arguments against the extinction impact. Don't let him do that because that's new in the two. He's going to try to say that the issue is with the framing. The problem is that the framing doesn't have an impact, and my framing needs to come first for his framing to exist. That's 986. So the issue is that basically you're going to be voting off the extinction impact. Goes cold conceded. It's necessary for humans to exist before we can actually value them and their life, which is what his framing says.
I'll start prep. What is this Wood-and-Smith card trying to say?
The Wood-Smith card is saying that alienation, like the root of alienation theory, the species being, is inherently wrong because it's a perfectionist view of society that ignores all of our differences and all the differences within the experiences we have.
Is there any pre-fiat reason why you should vote for the K?
For the critique, well, the critique comes at a higher level because it's the mindset of your case.
Yeah, but like, what's the framing for it? Is there any role of the ballot or role of the judge?
No, it just goes under whatever framing is around.
What's the framing? Okay, that's fine. order is going to be NC, AC, K. All right. Is anyone not ready? There's going to be an overview at the top as well. Okay. Cool. Overview at the top. They have considered a lot of terminal defense and internal links onto their arguments onto their framing. So that means that as long as I can win any sort of piece of any sort of offense off of my framing, that means that you're always going to be voting off of me first. Now onto my framing. Extend for everyone and says how we need to have framings to be binding in order for us not opt out of it. Ethics needs to be able to tell us why we're bad in the first place. And this is only solved through the fact that agency is something that is inescapable, or ability to creatively labor is something that's inescapable because they're trying to escape out of it as an instance of it itself. And also extend the Wardenburg one card in which it says that our species being is our ability to be able to creatively labor, or it's just the ability to set and pursue whatever sort of labor that we want to actually do. Any sense here 99 in which this says that we need to be respecting other ends in order to be able to achieve their ends in our ends in the first place, which means that this is internally being able to achieve end-based famous like his own. And also extend the intent argument. This is the biggest conceded argument in the last speech, because he concedes that his entirety of his contention level is consequentialist, which is the attack I made on his contention level debate, and also means that as long as this is dropped, this is not something that is internal. Consequences aren't something internal to the will. It's not something that we can control in all instances. It means that morality shouldn't be derived from it. If I try and shoot you, but I shoot another murderer who's trying to kill you, then who's also trying to kill you, you wouldn't call me a hero because you evaluate that action through the intention of the action. Next on, you want to extend the arguments on which you can't turn this sort of argument in the fact that without disproving the initial argument of the NC, which means that any sort of arguments that he makes for why the AF causes alienation or AF causes capitalism can't actually be evaluated unless he turns the Wardenburg 2 card, which is completely untouched. You extend Wardenburg 2, which is the fact that his AF causes forced labor. Now, he reads one card on this in which he says that we ignore differences, but we are confiscated being able to solve oppression through the fact, well, no, not con. Alienation is key to being able to solve for oppression because of the fact that it takes into account that there's something that's skew reason in the real world, such as alienation, but it's also key to being, but you also need to be able to solve for something that keeps all these agents binding together. Otherwise, we can just opt out of any sort of oppression-based framing, and that would never be able to motivate us. Oppressors need reasons for us to act, and the only way we can give that isn't some sort of self-referential view of how oppression is just bad because it causes inequality, because that's self-referential, because it's the same it's bad for this definition of itself, and that means that we need to be able to have this bindingness in order to be able to solve for anything. Now onto the app. Okay, so first, extended two hijacks that I make it on. One is the fact that on the CR99 card, and the fact that we need to be respecting other people's, we need to respect other people's ends in order to be able to achieve our own. And second is the fact that we're also considering you can't consider others if you're being alienated, because alienating means you're reducing your naturally given needs, and if you're reducing your naturally given needs, then you can never be able to consider others because you're only looking out for yourself. And also you have conceded an argument in which there's infinite calculus and infinite calculus through the fact that utilitarianism will always cause more and more impacts, and also the fact that consequences are largely unpredictable means that we can never be able to use a utilitarian calculus. You can see these arguments even if you say actor specificity, but we still have Kantian, the state is still made of state actors, which means that the Kant still applies to these arguments, and also the enterprise argument is also conceded in the fact that reason still applies to these instances. Also on Nye, this is his biggest way that he can actually win, but since he has considered multiple pieces of defense on it and the other internal links. So first, one, this assumes consequentialism to win any sort of death impacts in the first place, and second is not binding of us to try and reaffirm life all the time, because a soldier can jump in front of another soldier in order to try and save his life, independent of whether he thinks that life is valuable. And even if you don't buy those arguments, you're looking to the fact that he concedes the argument in which that if you are reducing your naturally given needs through alienation and reducing us from this, then you will never be able to consider others, which means that utilitarianism doesn't work because you're only considering your own well-being, and you prefer this for two reasons. One is strength of link. He never defends this argument whatsoever, but I put multiple pieces of defense on his Nye argument as why he's an internal link to my framework, which means that you always prefer mine. Second is the fact that you're always going to pursue freedom in the case of a chicken and the egg internal link scenario, and the fact that freedom allows us to be able to have our own individual search for ethics in order for us to find it in the first place. And this weighing, he says that weighing is what he considers binding, but it still doesn't respond to like the actual argument of we can abstract from our pleasure in order to actually do other things. And he says that weighing is binding, but we don't always have to weigh in these sorts of scenarios, because we don't weigh in the death of the family example, because people are taking pain in order to know knowledge in the first place. Now onto the K. First, all these arguments are unconsequential. Second, there's no impact on anything like Kantian or utilitarian framework because the utilitarian framework has terminal defense on it. Third, this is key to solving oppression due to the fact that you need to be able to define what oppression is in a normative sense in order for us to even be able to do anything about it. Also, there's a lot, if you don't define an oppression in a normative sense like a Kantian framework, then you're not able to be able to do anything due to the fact that oppressors will always have a different reason for why they think that their oppression, oppressors will have the think that they can co-opt this sort of movement because they'll say things like affirmative action are oppressive now. Yeah, so basically, the only ways he can actually win this round is through the Nye card because the entire contention level is consequentialist, and he concedes the fact that he concedes this in the last speech. He tries to extend the extinction scenario, but the fact that intents come first is the only because the only thing that we are actually responsible for, and it's internal to our will. Rather, as consequences are external to the will, goes completely conceded. Means that you can't evaluate any sort of consequential impacts on the contention level or on the framework level, and that means I have terminal defense against the entirety of the case, and also the fact that if I have any sort of arguments on why utilitarianism is not true, he never gives any sort of arguments as why his contention level can even lead into my arguments. Don't let him make any sort of new arguments. He says extinction is consequentialist. He says it's not new in the two. I made that argument before. And then okay, so you're voting for me for the main reason of the fact that I have conceded internally to the fact that you can never consider others whenever you're being alienated. And you're preferring this on one, the strength of believing, and two, presumed freedom. And also you're preferring my framework on the fact that there's also Seer card in which that you can never be able to get any ends. And also thirdly, he's not binding, so he fails to be dependent.
The order is going to be the NC, the critique case. Everyone's good?
Yeah.
The biggest mistake my opponent made in his last round, in the last speech, was dropping the Woodensmith 16 card, which means that there is no impact to his framing. If there is no impact to his framing, then his framing has no value. It says that alienation theory is wrong. It's a perfectionist view of humanity and its purpose, which ignores the aspects of life in common with other species. The problem with it, his theory is that, which Woodensmith outlines, is that it's assuming that we are intrinsically different from animals and that we have some sort of special desires and will. The problem is that that is not true, which the card spells out really, really well, and he completely cold concedes this is a terminal defense on his framing. All of his offense, and the only chance that he can win this round is if he wins framing. So the issue is that he has no offense left on the flow. Now the framing is gone, and go to CR 99. He says, he extends this and says that we have to respect the ends of others. The problem is that we can't when we're using an anthropocentric mindset. Cross-apply Smith, which says that we will always use hierarchies, which means that some people will always be viewed as lesser than others, which means we can never treat them as equal. He tries to make the claim that the K doesn't matter because of the framing. The problem is the K is a prerequisite to the framing. He says that, so, go to the K. Extensive Suki and Mula 09, his mentality that humans are intrinsically different and better than animals, and that somehow being equated with an animal is bad, is inherently anthropocentric. You need to extend Smith, which is saying that our hierarchies are all built off the anthropocentric because we consider some people to be more animal-like than others, which makes us justify the oppression. The problem is that what he says is that I don't have a definition of oppression. The problem is that the card is talking about the hierarchies we create. It's saying that when you have the hierarchies caused by anthropocentrism, that intentionally leads to the people on top viewing the people on the bottom or below them as lesser beings. That in and of itself means that you can never achieve his framework while under an anthropocentric mindset, because under that anthropocentric mindset, you will always view some people as more subhuman or more animalistic than everyone else. This means the K turns the framing and means that you will be voting off the K. And go to case. He tries to say that you need that the 986 card, that I still assume consequential and that life isn't necessarily viable. The problem is that to respect any form of well-being, you need to be alive. This goes, he doesn't actually make any good addresses towards this extent. 986, which is saying that people need to be alive for any actual values to occur. This means that it's a prerequisite to his framing, which I said in my last speech, which goes cold conceded. With the fact that this is a prerequisite, life is a prerequisite to anything else, means that the extinction impact outweighs his framing, because if we were all dead, then we cannot value other people's lives, and we are not valuing their lives when we allow extinction to happen. Extend the Panetta 17 card, which is the national services key to actually stopping this extinction and creating the mindset shift. Any risk of offense off the AC, any risk that any of this is true, means that you have to vote affirmative to avoid extinction and allow people to actually live in a world where they can follow the NC framing. The AC is a prerequisite to the NC, which is why you're voting off the AC.